Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of VFX Notes. As you can see, I'm here in London at Hugo's desk and Ian is in Sydney, I guess.
Sydney? What are you talking about, Hugo?
Welcome to the VFX Notes podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by Action VFX and ftrack. Black Friday VFX deals are just around the corner, and actionvfx.com's highest quality assets will be over 50% off for 3 days only. Starting November 22nd, you can get 55% off all VFX elements and double the monthly credits on annual subscription plans. Check out the link in the description for a sneak peek of the sale and to sign up for a reminder. This podcast is also sponsored by ftrack. ftrack Review is the all-in-one collaborative workspace where you and your team can give and receive interactive feedback on projects in real time. Forget endless email threads, comments on the wrong version, or constant video calls. ftrack Review replaces all of that with a seamless back and forth. Simply add your media, share your link, and you and your teammates and clients can review from anywhere in the world in real-time, frame-accurate sync. You can also scale up to full production management with ftrack Studio. Start your free trial today at ftrack.com. And now on to the show.
Hey, man. Oh, my God.
I can't believe you're here, actually. I can't believe you're here.
Can we take these 3D glasses off?
Yes, please. Because I can't see anything with them.
To everyone at home, I am in Hugo's place, his bunker in London. It is amazing. I'm sure people have seen photos of this place. I am still, I can't even talk. It's so cool.
Oh,
super
man.
cool.
Yeah, you like my man cave, I guess.
I feel so petty. Oh, not petty. I feel so behind. I just record with a laptop and a microphone, and you've just got this expansive setup. It's awesome. It's super awesome.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. I can't believe you're here. I'm so happy that you're actually physically here. So this is only the second episode we're actually doing in person.
It is, yeah.
So it's great. It's great to have you here.
And we're doing a really cool episode too on Avatar.
Yeah.
The original Avatar from 2009.
Yeah.
I think we're doing it partly because Avatar 2 is coming out in December, but also I feel like Avatar sums up so much of what I love about the visual effects industry, right? Like the ingenuity, the innovation, all the different technologies that made it happen.
Yeah.
But also I was quite close to it at the time, which we'll get into a little bit. But yeah, Avatar, amazing. Amazing we're doing it together.
I know. And I mean, it's such a special film. I just went to see it again. I went to see this remaster version that they had. I had the pleasure of seeing it on IMAX 3D here in London. And it was stunning just as it was 10 years ago. Because 10 years ago, to this day, I went to see it on Waterloo's IMAX as well. Because they also had like a 4K version at the time. And it's still... Isn't it incredible how it has not aged? I feel like the film is still as extraordinary as it was before. Like, I was completely into the film.
Well, okay,
Yeah.
but let's talk about that. Because, Avatar, I don't think I'm being controversial when I say, when some people bring up Avatar, they say, oh, it's not memorable. It hasn't become a Star Wars, with memorable lines or characters or whatever. Now, I don't know if I thought that or not, but it's kind of true. It's not necessarily in the psyche of everyone like Star Wars is. Of course, it did incredibly well.
Yeah.
It was the #1 film forever, box office-wise. When I saw it, just on a normal, amazing laser projection in Sydney, not 3D, unfortunately, people were, re-saw it recently in the last few months. People loved it.
Yeah.
People went bananas for it, and they laughed, and they talked about how good it was. They'd forgotten how good it was.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing in relation to a film that maybe people had thought was awesome at the time, partly because of the 3D-ness of it. I think they've just forgotten Hugo.
I think so too, and I also forgotten it. Like it happened to me as well because I haven't seen it in ages. And like last time I saw it was in 2014. I think this film, yes, it would have been better if they had the sequels 2, 3, and 4 or right away. I think maybe yes, it could have been a bit more on the psyche, and people probably would have remembered it more. But it's been 10 years, and I don't know what's about this film. Like, this film is just a bit hypnotic. I guess it's like an hypnose that people go in when they watch the film. I'm watching the film, and I'm completely in this story, and I'm inside this universe. And I know what it is. I think it's because of the way it's built, the way that James Cameron builds the story, and you slowly go into the avatars, and he's teaching you as you go.
There's so much. What's the word? Build up and payoff.
Yeah.
There's probably a better filmic screenplay term than that. But there's heaps of well done exposition. Yeah. By Jake, by the scientists, and then that pays off later in the battle, or the fact that like one thing I remember was Sigourney Weaver's character dies. Spoiler, sorry.
It has been 10 years,
and there's some important information described about how they can't bring her back to life. But when they transform Jake into one of the creatures at the end, it doesn't come as a big surprise that they're doing that because they tried to do it. Yeah. That's just one example of when I watched it on the screen this time. I went, I think I get that now. Yeah. Maybe 10 years ago I didn't quite get it.
And I think that is present on all James Cameron's films. And James Cameron has this... I personally think he's an absolutely genius. He's one of the best directors right now alive in making films. And the way he builds these stories, because he does this on all the films, on every single film he's made, from Terminator to Terminator 2 to Aliens, he has that. He has this exposition, but it's not too heavy. You don't feel overwhelmed by it. Yeah. He also is amazing at explaining complex stuff.
Yes.
He's very good at explaining things, like really complex, like really high-end concepts, especially on Avatar. We have a lot of high-end concepts going on here, from the body, the transfer, the technology to use. And by the time you're listening to this, you believe everything. Like, although this is completely not possible, but you kind of think, oh yeah, of course, sure, it's possible.
Okay. No, so I'm not disagreeing with you at all in terms of James Cameron's approach. I would say it's actually maybe the only one thing I still haven't quite got my head around with this film, which is the avatar body and the creature existence when they go to sleep and Jake is asleep, right? So I'm going to struggle explaining this. So Jake's in some sort of thing in the lab. The avatar body is out in the forest, right? They go to sleep. Jake wakes up in the lab. How does he know how long to stay awake? Yeah. Like this is like the biggest smallest nitpick.
I know what you mean.
And so if he doesn't, yes, that's true, because she tries to wake him up when things are exploding,
and he's still having breakfast and this and that. Yeah. So
it's my tiny nitpick. I'm sorry, I know. James Cameron.
Well, it can't be perfect, I guess, but I feel like, I don't know. I look at his work and I look at how he's built these films, and I just see this person that is so dedicated to creating these films. His dedication is just impressive. Like, when I'm watching, I was recently, I really would recommend everyone to watch the Blu-ray. There's like this really amazing 3-disc Blu-ray. There's also like a 3D version as well, if you want to check it in 3D. But unfortunately, there's no 4K version. But he goes through this entire thing on this Blu-ray and explains everything as how it was done. And when I look at this, I see a person that is so committed to create the best story in the world. And his first choice is always to make the story make sense. The whole thing, even the creatures, the way he builds the mechs and the technology and the amp suits, the amp suits, the flying creatures, they're all grounded into reality. And he goes through these researches of creatures, and the mechanical mech suit, the amp suit, has to actually work so that the shoulders actually move this way. This kind of dedication, almost like an engineer level, He's like an engineer making a film.
Can I give a shout out to Ty Ruben Ellingson, who was one of the concept designers on the mech suits in particular. He gained a bit of notoriety working on Jurassic Park at ILM, and then Jim Cameron brought him on for Avatar, years later. And that's right, in a documentary, they really say that they didn't just want the amp suits or the spaceships to look cool. They had to have like a real purpose.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and you can feel that on the screen.
Yeah, but you kind of feel that on all his films, and I just think he's extraordinary, and I think I'm not gonna continue talking about this, but people should go and check the Blu-ray. There's also some really nice documentaries about the ecological message of the film, and also this is really outrageous. James Cameron actually goes to Brazil to try to save the Amazon forest. He talks with Lula, the president at the time. He talks with the indigenous people over there. It's just anything this person wants to do, he's going to go full in. Yeah. That's the feeling I have. It reminds me a bit of Stanley Kubrick. Stanley Kubrick used to be this person that if he was making a film, he would be doing it for 10 years. And that was the only thing he would do. This is how I feel that James Cameron approaches this thing.
Well, and it does have a message, clearly an ecological one. As I understand it, Avatar 2 is even more heavy on that. And why not? I mean,
I got to see the intro, the clip.
Oh, let's not talk about it, Hugo.
At the end of Avatar 1, the remaster, they have about, I think it's 7 minutes or 6 minutes. And it's in 3D as well. And I must say, man, we're going to go in for a ride, because I think it's even better and it's even more stunning. Yeah. And I don't think I've ever seen CG at this quality. It's mind-blowing. Some
people I know saw a presentation at the DGA in Los Angeles a couple of weeks ago, which was also showcasing behind-the-scenes stuff from Avatar 2. And they said, we had to sign an NDA and can't talk about it. But it's something that we haven't even... We know that they're doing underwater performance capture, and the level of rendering and CG work is, of course, been increased since 2009. But it showed some extra things they've been doing, apparently, that is out of this world. So I'm super stoked. Hugo, you mentioned Jim Cameron. I mean, we should talk about him a little bit, right? I am, of course, obsessed with him as a filmmaker for all the reasons. But here's one other special reason, and this isn't a self-promotional podcast, although here's my book I wrote called Masters of Effects. Here's my book I wrote called Masters of Effects. And it just happens to include a couple of the VFX soups who worked on Avatar, Joe Letteri, John Bruno. But it also has a foreword by Jim Cameron.
I know.
And I might have told this story already on VFX Notes, but we had asked James Cameron to write that forward, and he didn't have time, or he wasn't going to do it. And so it wasn't going to happen. Then right at the last minute, he sent in 2,000 words, which talks about all the VFX soups he's worked with. Dennis Muren, Joe Letteri, all of them. And the publisher had only allocated 400 words. And so they said, we'll have to cut it down. I said, you are not cutting this down at all. So it's in there, and it's really cool.
It is. It's an amazing forward.
Yeah. I feel like I have I've not met James Cameron, but I just feel like that was a very special, nice thing of him to do for this book. And
but this has to do with the dedication. You see, he is like that. He's one of these. I can see it on all the documentaries from Terminator 2, from Aliens, from all these films. He is one of those persons. He probably has a very special connection with all these VFX soups. So he thought, okay, I'm going to write something. Probably took him some time, and he probably took from his very busy schedule, I'm sure. Yeah. And he sit down and make a 2,000 words forward for a book. It's stunning. It only shows how impressive this body of work is. And let's not forget that besides being an amazing director and has created some of the best films, sci-fi films that we all love, he's also an amazing artist. The drawings that he makes and the concept art that he makes, they all talk about this amazing concept art that he created for Avatar, which is the basis for all of for the rest of the film. But he has, just recently they published this amazing book.
Oh, Tech Noir.
I really recommend everyone to check it out.
Oh, here, you've got it.
This book, which has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of drawings
That's his original sketch from like 1995, isn't it, or something? Yeah. And that's one of the fascinating things is that he actually wrote this scriptment for Avatar either before Titanic or around Titanic. And at the time, he was the CEO of Digital Domain with Stan Winston. And they, one of the plans was that they would use the ever-increasing amazing technology and artistry that DD was developing to do digital humans, i.e. digital avatar characters. But they couldn't at the time. It just wasn't there, was it? So
no, they told them like, no way, you're crazy. Well, but the cool thing about this is that this person, like the way he operates with both him and his team, they're always doing impossible things. Like, that's the crazy thing about it. Like, all of his films, let me put it this, how many times is this person going to revolutionize cinema? Because if you think about it, like, some directors have done it once. He's done it like at least 3 times now.
That's right. And the big ones being Terminator 2, Titanic, and Avatar. But
now he's going to do it again, I'm assuming. Yeah. I'm assuming he's going to do it a 4th time.
Actually, let me ask you that. So, Hugo, another quick background thing. It's 2009, the film has come out. Would you believe at the time I was not working in visual effects journalism? I still had my old job. So I was writing a few articles every now and then. So I saw Avatar as a real outsider, not writing any stories on it, loved it and everything like that. But you were obviously working as a visual effects artist in London.
Yeah.
I want to know about your reaction to it, not just the visual effects, but the big thing about Avatar, apart from the visual effects, was the audience experience, right? And I mean the 3D. Yeah. And that went away for all the reasons that we could talk about 7 other podcasts about. But people did love the 3D in Avatar. So anyway, back to your experience. What do you remember at the time?
Oh, I remember it so well because I've just moved to London and I was working at Nexus at the time. And funnily enough, Avatar came out. And of course, 3D became a huge trend. And we ended up doing 3 commercials at Nexus with 3D. So 3D commercials, for Panasonic to promote their TVs, because at the time they were like really trying to push them. And then PlayStation had a bunch of 3D stereoscopic trailers as well in cinematics. Then I moved to the mill, became the head of Nuke there. And I can't express how much this film has influenced everything. Like from the way we looked at rendering, because, the way that it was so photoreal at the time, the way that everyone started using mocap and everyone started using performance capture. Obviously, video games have done it for a while, but it became mainstream. Yes. Like every company, even commercials were doing it. It had a huge impact at the mill, had a huge impact on the entire London Soho industry, because I remember that was the only thing we talked about at the time. And I remember watching the film several times. I'll never forget it. It really changed the way we looked at 3D and CG as well, and how you can reach such a realism, because it was not an animated film. That's the cool thing about it. It was a real film with real actors, with real sets, and then you had this side of it which was done in 3D, but it was done in such a seamless way with the rest of the footage that you didn't even thought it was in CG. And I think that's the trick. The trick that he places with you is that he starts the film with footage and he progressively go into CG. Yeah. And then by the time halfway through, it's all CG. And you don't even notice it. I think that's, and that had a huge impact. I can't, I was already in love with CG. I was already in love with visual effects, and that's why I moved to London. My dream was always to work at the mill. And I managed to get that dream out of managed to do that. But this film revitalized all my love for VFX. I came back from I grew up with looking at Terminator as like, wow, my God, I want to do that one day. I was a kid, I was like a teenager when Terminator came out. And then I was still kind of a teenager when Titanic came out. I was like 18 or something. And it just progressively made me more and more and more want to work in VFX. And then Avatar came around. I was already a bit jaded by then. And then it just pushed me back in again. And I became all revitalized again. Yeah. And it has a huge impact in my career for sure. Yeah.
I'm not sure people weren't going to cinemas or anything like that, but it definitely pushed people into cinemas. Yeah. And of course, multiple times, because I, for one, saw it in 2D first and then saw it in 3D and was like, oh my God, I need to see it again in 3D because there hadn't really been, I mean, I'm not even sure there was a huge release in 3D before Avatar.
No, that was the first
Someone will
big
tell
one.
me that there was this other big, like as in that year or in recent times.
There was some animations and there was some stuff here and there.
Yeah, but that was huge.
But this was the biggest one.
And actually, let's draw on what you said. What worked about it was it actually wasn't just 3D rendered, CG rendered 3D.
Yeah.
They filmed in native stereo with this pace rig, Cameron pace rig, called the Fusion rig.
Yeah.
Right? And Cameron had actually done 3D before with a Terminator experience at Universal Studios, I think. Yeah. But the rig for that is like ridiculous, you know, these 2 camera rigs.
As crazy. You say, it's the size of a refrigerator, as you said on the behind the scenes. No, this film paved the way for 3D, and it's unfortunate the way that it ended, because I've always been a huge fan of 3D, especially because of such a big gamer I am. And at the time, Sony PlayStation 3, for example, was really pushing 3D, and multiple games were done in 3D. And gaming works really well in 3D.
Yeah, right.
It's awesome for 3D.
Right.
But unfortunately, I think Avatar was really well made because it was the correct... You know how James Cameron is. He's going to do everything perfect. And so the Fusion camera, the way it was, you know, with the beam splitter, with the 2 Cine Altas, it was the best version of 3D you can ever have. It was completely scientifically calculated for the distance of the eyes. No one got sick with the 3D. And even the way he filmed, the way the editing is happening, is so carefully placed, the camera, so no one would ever get sick. Yeah. And I think this is the film is almost 3 hours long, and you never even, by half, like the first 10 minutes, you're blown away by the 3D, and then you forget it.
Well,
you completely forget it.
Here's Ian's. This podcast has become about Ian's little nitpicks. I would say it happened to me in 2009, and it happened to me this year watching it again. There's that opening scene of Jake coming out of the pod with people in weightlessness, where it just is a little bit straining on your eyes. Yeah. But that is the only scene. But it's almost because that is the opening scene, right?
I think that's why your eyes get used to it, and then by the time you have all these big fights with all the flying,
it's brilliant.
And I think your eyes get used to it. Even that is built up really well. And the problem I think here, I think it's a shame 3D went away. Well, it didn't went away. If you use VR, it's still all 3D. So if you use VR headsets,
but do you think did it go away because some films did conversions instead of native? And conversions, I mean, some conversions are incredible, but you can't get that natural feeling to it, and it made your eyes hurt. Yeah. I mean, I can remember it's even a Sam Worthington film where people seem to hate the 3D so much that they remember this film, and it's like the second Clash of the Titans film, right? Wrath of the Titans. Yeah.
I think it has to do with that. Yes, conversions, but also like badly filmed 3D as well. Right. When you have bad rigs and it's disaligned and they're like hacking it instead of making it correctly. Yeah. I think that was why 3D went away for me and for everyone, because it wasn't correctly done. And conversions has a problem because even if you do it really well, because the film was not filmed with 3D in mind, then the angles, the editing, and the pace is not going to work for 3D. Just the same. It's almost the same way. I don't know if people in the audience have done VR. I've done VR before, and VR is the same thing. When you're doing a project in VR, you have to have a lot of careful with what's in the background, what's in the foreground, the way from one shot to the other you go, the way it moves the camera. Otherwise, you're going to get people sick. So there are a lot of companies out there that make VR games, outstanding VR games, that develop a lot of technology for this, for how your eyes can track things and how where it should be looking. Avatar is really well made. The other films were not. There's so many. Like if you look at Alice in Wonderlands and all these films that came out of it, they are terrible. And also sometimes they're too dark. They didn't compensate the brightness for it. Like Avatar has actually been built up in brightness in purpose so that it would look. It's also vibrant. It has a lot of colors. It has everything correctly made for 3D.
And you don't get sore eyes. I mean, I didn't.
You don't. Yeah. And when they were shooting, the dailies were in 3D. So they would go into a room, they would watch the dailies in 3D. Whenever you have a film that was converted, none of that happens. They are shooting the film as it was a normal film, and then it's an afterthought.
Yeah.
And that's why it doesn't work. As much as I know Prime Focus made a business out of making amazing 3D conversion, but even they can't fix if the film is filmed incorrectly.
Yes.
That's the problem.
Yes.
You can't fix it.
Yeah. Now, we've actually jumped to talking about 3D. Curiously, that actually came like 3/4 of the way into production of this film. Although Jim Cameron and Pace had been developing this rig for many years, they didn't film the live action first. Yep. They, of course, Hugo, spent years developing what could be called the performance capture virtual camera volume. What else are we going to call this process on Avatar? I don't even think they call it a process, do they?
No, they don't. It's funny because the documentary is from 2010, and they didn't have the words at the time.
No.
So they were also saying performance capture for the first time. It's so funny because they were talking about emotion capture and emotional cap. They were getting all these words, and now they are industry standard. We had this conversation off camera before. I know, Ian, that this was not the first film to have these things. Of course not.
What we were saying, of course, games are heavy users of motion capture
for years,
and building scenes virtually.
We talked about a film on our podcast, Final Fantasy.
And Polar Express is actually considered a real game changer in terms of the tools that ImageWorks developed for that Robert Zemeckis film. But what seemed to have been missing with Polar Express and even probably all films up to Avatar was, and I think this is right, Hugo, isn't it? Some sort of connection between the actors being on set, being motion captured, the director and filmmakers getting a live view of the actors translated into their CG characters, and then the director able to compose shots. And everyone now will talk about those as virtual camera or simulcams. It's so amazing. Avatar really did bring those together.
Yeah, and we look at Avatar now and it's quaint. I know it's quaint because you're so used to like, oh yeah, of course it's a virtual camera. Oh, of course, it's not a problem. It's not a problem at all. We can do it tomorrow on a commercial. Yeah. But none of this was there was no manual for this. They didn't know how to do it. They didn't really knew how to gel all these things. They were making it up as they go. Yeah. It was really like that. And
some of that came very much from an interesting collaboration between Rob Legato, a Oscar-winning visual effects supervisor, who'd done a lot of virtual camera stuff for films like Aviator, would you believe?
Yeah.
And, really basically extending what previs could be with the virtual camera. Yeah. And then also an amazing tech guy called Glenn Derry, who worked for Video Hawks, which is, all that on-set video stuff. And he was like getting much more into, here's what it would take to have a workflow for performance capture, motion capture into virtual cameras. How does Motion Builder add to that? And so they just had that side covered, and Jim Cameron came along and, not that he did it personally.
Yeah, of course.
Welded it together.
No. And James Cameron is amazing on that. He's always naming everyone. He's always like, he never says it was him. He's always naming everyone else. It's amazing, actually, how he respects his crew, and we're not saying that at all. But I find also, like, from a career, I know a lot of people have talked about the technology of this, and we all know how this was done, and a lot of information is out there already. I really wanted to talk about the creative aspect of this, because for me, I think that's where this is revolutionary. Because up to this point, whenever you want to do a film, it's always a problem. It's always a disaster. You go on set, you spend months and months getting the set ready. You go there, the actors maybe are not in the mood, maybe something goes wrong on the camera. You're filming something, and it's like you get these months of preparedness, and then you have 5 minutes to do it.
Yeah.
And you're like, fuck, man, I only have 5 minutes to do this. And then, okay, we have to go. The sun is off. Let's go to the next shot. And you don't even breathe anything. Yeah. You don't even, And I know some directors in the world manage to circumvent that. Like, I never really understood why Kubrick managed to get Warner Bros. To allow him to film for a year or two, but he did, he did that. But James Cameron found like this amazing pipeline of these 3 steps. I thought it was fascinating because first he had this virtual camera that allowed him to just look at this environment. So they had this massive pre-vis environment, which was literally like the Avatar, but really low res, really low texture.
Pre-vis is the right word.
Yeah, it was literally pre-vis. I know now we use Unreal and we use those things. At the time, it wasn't Unreal. It was, I actually don't know what it was. I'm assuming it's Motion Builder. That's what I'm assuming. That's
think
what it looks like.
It's low-res Maya environments made into a Motion Builder sequence.
With like some kind of superimposed footage of the faces on them, which looks really weird, but it looks like a PlayStation 2 game or something like that.
They made it happen, though. Yeah.
But this 3-step tier, that's the creative aspect of the mind of James Cameron here, which is, okay, we're going to use the virtual camera to check the environment, to scout. We're going to scout. Yep. That's what we're doing, just like we do scouting on real filming. For people that don't know, scouting is a phase of the production. They go out, they take pictures, they go to the locations and try to look if the location fits what they're telling the story. So he scouted this world with the virtual camera. Once he scouted, he brought in all the actors. And then this is the revolutionary part of it. When he filmed, he did not care about lenses. He did not care about framing. It's like a theater play. He's there with the actors. And the funny thing with motion capture, I've done motion capture for gaming. It's funny because the director can be in the volume. He can be there with them because he doesn't have the markers. Yeah. So he doesn't show up. He's invisible. Yeah. So he can actually be next to the actor. He can talk directly and he can stage this theater play in front of him. And then while this theater play is working, he's really just focused on the performance and emotion of these actors. And then he has, of course, the motion control, like the motion capture set, which has hundreds of cameras. And then on top of that, he has like these dozens of HD cameras of videographers witness cameras. Yeah. But these are like television people just filming with zoom lenses and just focusing on faces. Really just focusing on faces. And he shoots the entire film like this, with never thinking about what lens he's going to use, what framing is going to use. And this removes all that stress of what we're going to do in terms of cinematography and lighting. Yeah. Because as any director knows, half of your time is spending moving lights around and moving cameras around. That's what happens. And you never get to have time with your actors. So it's almost like this is the ultimate rehearsal. And then a year later, he goes and shoots, and finally, after months of editing, they had 2 editors on this thing to edit all these like double and quadruple screen edits, really. I don't even imagine.
It's amazing to look at, isn't it?
It's just like these Avid projects that look like a minefield, like a mind fuck. And then basically they play back the best takes that he likes, and he's there with the virtual camera just focusing on actually dollies, on camera moves, on what lenses we're going to use. And he just keeps doing takes and takes and takes. And he's basically reshooting what they shot before, a year before. Yeah. This process is amazing because I don't think anyone really has done it this way. That's why I'm saying.
Until that point.
And I think
I totally agree with you. It's something I'd forgotten about until I saw that documentary. Yeah. What's curious, Hugo, is that I reckon there's been an interesting variation on that today, which is the real-time game engines and the simulcam things you can buy or build up yourself have actually pushed some directors to make decisions about lenses and lensing early. Good and bad, right? That's a good and bad thing. Yeah. On a film that unfortunately not too many people loved, Pinocchio. Yeah.
You mean the last version?
The live action Robert Zemeckis.
Oh yeah, that one. Yeah.
What they did do was they would do a lot of previews, a lot of setup with this virtual cinematography paradigm. But then they absolutely did what James Cameron did, which is, but not a year later, a day later, come back to an empty capture space to reshoot the scenes that they'd shot the day before, as I understand it. Yeah. So I mean, the reason James Cameron kind of came back a year later was not just because of the technology, but they went and shot the live action. And that sort of
they
thing.
were somewhere else, of course.
But I think there's some interesting evolutions of the technology developed for Avatar.
Yeah.
That some work for some directors and not others. Yeah. But it's a really nice point to make that you made about it's a stage play. Yeah. And he does want the performance of the characters.
The creative process is so amazing because, and I think not just because he's James Cameron, he's allowed to spend so much time doing cameras. Maybe Zemeckis wasn't allowed because I think also he's the correct guy at the correct place at the correct time because this has never been done before this way. And so the studio doesn't really know because no one knows because it's new.
Yeah.
So it's like, if he says, "Oh, I need 6 months," they say, "Oh, I guess I don't know." Like they don't know, like they're like, "I guess you need 6 months." Yeah. But now they've done Avatar. Now they know, and they're like, "No, you're gonna get today." And it's like I think he also
is the way around that making 5 sequels so that it goes on.
I think the interesting thing about James Cameron's career is that he's done this on every film. He has always done things that has never been really done before. He's a bit like Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs also didn't invent the phone. He didn't invent the iPad. He didn't invent the computer as we know it. But he made all these connections and brought in all of them together to work as one. And I think that's his trick. He does this really well.
I wonder as well if part of it is built out of frustration. I mean, he's making big films that need this technology. But like an example is, you could make an Avatar without all this.
Of course.
You could build the Na'vi with makeup. Yeah. You could. Yeah. And there are films that do that.
Yeah, of course.
But it requires 5 to 10 hours of makeup sessions for all those characters. So he doesn't want to do that. Yeah. I mean, he kind of has had that experience with animatronics and effects, practical effects in other films.
Sigourney Weaver talks about that, not on this film, but on other films that she's done in visual effects, where by the time they're done with the makeup, they're exhausted.
Yeah,
they can't even do it anymore.
Yeah,
like they're like, "Oh, I just been in 6 hours in makeup. What I'm gonna do acting now?"
Yeah,
like it's a problem. And she mentions on this film, they came in from the lot, put the markers, do the T-pose, and they're doing it.
Yeah,
they're right away doing it.
That's right.
And it's a 5-minute thing.
And so that's right. The creative side is most important. You want Sam Worthington and Zoe Saldana to be there, looking at each other's eyes and acting, but you want to have the technology to capture as much as possible. And I suppose it was just normal optical motion capture, but then the head pieces, the head cam was relatively new. Definitely used in gaming. This is a Glenderry thing, and the camera is really just capturing image based, right? It's not anything more than that. Yeah.
This is what they now have names for it. If you go to Weta's website, actually, this is what you're talking about, the facets, isn't it? The software that actually tracks this.
The workflow that Weta Digital, now Weta FX, have is basically something called facets, which I think they've won a Cytec Oscar for.
Yeah, they did.
But I guess, I mean, even on set, it wasn't necessarily Weta driving that. It was the production team led by Glenderry for that sort of technology. And what it meant was, of course, Weta down the track could depart from the facial the capture to do their own facial animation, but it was about getting as much information that they could get. In the same way that the witness cams were about getting as much overall information about the full body performance or the close-up face performance. I mean, that's kind of what Jim Cameron was surely after with this film, was give me as much data about everything as possible so that I can then make it as realistic as I want or depart from it when I need to. And I wonder, and I can't wait to find out for Avatar 2, whether they've totally departed from some things where they know that they don't need that capture, or whether they...
I'm sure they refined it. I'm sure they've refined the pipeline. I think it's fascinating also because a lot of people have done similar things even after Avatar, and they weren't as successful. And I feel that the reason also that it's not maybe as successful is because the approach... This is not a fight for him, some films that you hear of these background stories where they did the mocap, and the mocap artist thinks he's very good.
Sure.
And then they say, oh, nothing was animated, the mocap did everything. And then the animators say, oh, no, we did everything, he didn't do anything. There's this fight and there's this disconnect. This didn't happen on this film. On this film, there was this complete communication between animation and the production. And they tried to, like you said, get as much data as possible. And then the animators picked that data and made an interpretation of that data, and then made some of it they left, some of it they've added, some of it they've evolved, some of it was transformed. It was a complete team effort to make and transition all these actors' performances into this CG character. And this, you know why I'm saying this? I'm saying this because of the fact that when they have these, when they're riding, for example, these big creatures, when they're riding the banshees.
Yeah.
Normally, you would have like a motion control rig,
Yeah, like a motion base.
Yeah, a motion based. They didn't do a motion based. Why not? Because they felt, okay, I want to have the organic feeling of actually going to a set and actually, just like they do with real films, they would go to a car and they would bounce on the car and they would bounce on a rig, on an helicopter. And so let's just shake the actors up. They're acting and they're trying to hold on. They're trying to do something. Instead of having this pre-programmed motion-based, which would effectively make the actor already know what the movement would be. So he's going to memorize it. So he's going to become more and more, the performance is going to become more and more stale as time goes on. I like this.
I wonder though, I agree with you, and that is what happened. I wonder some of it was about, no pun intended, winging it a little bit. And why I say that is they shot all this performance capture somewhere in Los Angeles, and they just had to build sets, proxy sets. I mean, I think these sets actually have fun names as well.
Yeah.
Where, they're just kind of like bits of metal or chicken wire. And again, they do this in games,
especially
right?
The stones in
Yeah. What was that?
I really would recommend people to go and watch one of my favorite games of all time, The Last of Us from Naughty Dog. And they have extensive behind the scenes, and it's exactly like Avatar. It's exactly the same thing. Yeah, you basically have these really weird props that sometimes have markers as well on them, and they're just to help you there. But I love this organic feeling of it. It's the same with the camera work as well, which is handheld as well.
Yes. Very
and he
handheld.
has on the controller, on this little virtual camera, he has actually game controllers that he can control for tilt, rotation, and speed. So effectively what he can do, which is really cool, is he can have a handheld, but then with the controllers, augment or multiply the movement. So then if he's pretending to do a dolly, he can make it much faster than normal, or he can make it much slower than normal by controlling it with these controllers.
And so the only thing to remember about that, Hugo, is that is kind of like first in incarnation. Now those virtual cameras, simulcams, exist as like they're on iPads.
Yeah, I just used one. I was doing a mocap shoot with the Sniper Elite for Rebellion, and they have one there. It's exactly the same one as the Avatar. It became an industry standard, and I picked it up and I used it for framing, and it has like a little monitor, and it behaves just like a camera, and you can ask to swap lenses, and it's amazing. I think people just take it for granted now, but this stuff was really difficult. This is 2008, 2007 when they're filming this. Yeah. Like if you look back and think about 2007 and what was coming out at the time.
Another interesting segue of that, Hugo, is what we've been talking about is all the filming. I mean, basically, Jim, the setup of this is to replicate what they might have been able to go and do a live action film, but in the volume space, right? And so what do you need to make it feel like a film? That's why they've done the virtual camera. Yeah. That's why they've done the more organic kind of rigging. Yeah. And there are lots of stunts being performed inside the volume as well. But why are they even doing this at all? Like, why does he want this when he knows Weta Digital, now Weta FX, is going to go and animate the characters? Well, it's because he gave Weta a template. Yeah. He gave Weta the film. Yeah. I mean, I guess that happens now. You kind of, directors go and shoot plates and they shoot a film. they do previs and do post-vis on it, and there's literally a word called handover, right? But it's not really a template for the whole film, and you couldn't release the motion capture version of Avatar or the template version of Avatar. I still think looking at the template is fascinating.
It's amazing.
Because it's almost more than previs. It's Jim Cameron's ideas about cameras, lenses, pacing, and, in a simplistic way, Weta Digital just put its high-res version of the assets in.
I know.
Not true at all. We're going to talk about some of the...
No disrespect, but it is a bit like that. It is.
Yeah.
And fascinating thing is that if you guys have the opportunity on this Blu-ray, there's 3 discs. On one of the discs, there's actually what you're saying. Like, you can actually watch several clips. I think it's 45 minutes of clips where you can pick through the remote. You can pick to watch just the animatic version, what they called the template.
Yep.
Or you can watch the final, or you can watch just the mocap, or if you want, you can watch all 3 in simultaneously. And it's amazing. It's fascinating to watch because you look at it, and Weta really managed to translate completely the performance.
Oh, totally.
It's all there.
Yeah.
From the facial expression to the little nods, the little twinkles, the little things that they do on set. They did a perfect one-to-one, and then, of course, added to it, of course, because they were doing some things that was not possible on the volume, like jumping and flying and also, like, running much faster than they could do on the volume. But it is really impressive to watch that. And to add to what you were saying about the way that James Cameron approached this, it's really funny to watch the documentaries when you see that he actually went to a tropical forest with the actors.
Yeah, and like made them wear the costumes.
Yeah.
I mean...
Just so they could feel it. And this is really dedication, because he went to this forest, they walked and hiked for miles, and then they brought this HD camera with them, and he basically did a rehearsal with them over there.
Part of that immersive side of the filmmaking, which just meant that the actors... I mean, we've talked about this before too, and actors always talk about they hate acting against green screen. Yeah. Well, I'm sure some actors get a bit sick of the volume.
Yeah.
Now, part of that has changed a little bit with LED wall filmmaking, but I'm sure they still get sick of LED wall. So with Avatar, because of its long production schedule, they were able to go and do these extra things. It was super cool.
Yeah, it was.
I want to jump a little bit now, Hugo, to talking about Weta Digital.
Yeah.
And... we say they just translated the template into a final version.
Yeah, we oversimplifying, of course.
They did ridiculous amount of asset builds. What they also really did here was capitalize on this amazing run of visual effects work that they'd been doing since the Lord of the Rings, basically. And the big film before Avatar was King Kong.
Yeah.
The big step in King Kong, apart from performance capture from Andy Serkis, was this use of the facial action coding system research, FACS, to translate muscles in the face into CG rigs, right?
Yeah.
Rigs of characters. And so in King Kong, you can feel it. You can feel it's just right. In Avatar, I just feel the rigs of the CG characters are just doing what faces are meant to do. Yeah. So it's a huge thing that Weta solved, I think, for Avatar here. Yeah. And, the argument always comes up that, but don't you just, can't you just translate the dots into the animation? Well, no.
Well, the way that they approach this is a really different way. And of course they've evolved now this. This has to do with some of their pipelines called tissue, which have a complete system of bones and muscle systems behind the epidermal surface, which is the skin.
Which sounds so obvious, right?
It does. It does.
Before, look, companies definitely built bones.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see it in making also Jurassic Park. But sometimes visual effects studios just basically sculpted a character and then went straight into like muscle and animation, right? And blend shapes, as you say. Joe Letteri, the senior visual effects supervisor there, I feel over many films has said, why don't we go back to realism? if we had to do this for real, what would it involve?
Yeah.
So tissue is all about going from the inside out.
Yeah.
And we just talk about that all the time now with CG characters, don't we?
Yeah.
The muscles, the fat layer, the fascia,
Yeah.
everything. Yeah. Well, it turns out Weta was doing that in a big way, and they won a Cytec award for it as well.
Yeah, and I guess I know it's quaint now, and it makes so much sense. But of course, the fact of the matter is that they are not just sculpting muscles and bones; they're actually doing a full simulation on the computer of how the bones are actually affecting the stretchiness of the muscles and the muscles. So it's almost like going back to anatomy and actually going back to actually almost medical standard of simulation. That's how, and this, of course, Weta's been doing that for a while, not just with bones and skin. They do even that with trees, where they have a growing system with trees, and where they age the trees, not by aging them with ZBrush painting, no, but they actually age them in the computer as an actual simulation of 100 years to get the tree to look like that. So it's fascinating, and that's why they won a few Oscars now, because of all these softwares. And I guess yeah, we didn't meant to like oversimplify it. I think Weta has made an amazing job. They still do to this day, but this is groundbreaking stuff at that time.
Can I tell you a story about this as well, relating to Weta? I'm sure they won't mind me saying this. They won the Oscar for the film, and of course got a lot of kudos for Avatar. But I would say this, at the time that the first DVDs started coming out, there was a lot of discussion about performance capture.
Yeah.
And that's because these things like showing the actors on set and whatever. And Weta didn't get a heap of coverage, actually, at the time.
No.
Despite all the coverage that did exist. And
there's
Cinefx,
not a single extra on the Blu-ray.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I went to a very special session in New Zealand, in Wellington, at Park Road Post, a year after the film came out, in that Weta put on, and it was part of something called AnimFX NZ, and they had a whole day of Avatar presentations. And what I saw there was all the things that Weta had done, as well as the performance capture work that had been done by production. And I think it was so eye-opening to see all the technology innovation just from Weta, just from Weta's side. And so I think personally I got a lot of like, oh, that's what you had to do to make that happen. But as you say, yes, the DVD doesn't actually have any Weta-specific things.
It's a shame, but this has been an ongoing development that they've been making. The last time I was at the View Conference, I saw this amazing presentation with Junior, from the Ang Lee film with Will Smith.
Yeah.
Which basically is just an evolution of all of this, because they go through the bones, they go through the structures, they go through the way they've captured it, they go through how they skinned it and lighted it and rendered it. And I find it fascinating how all these films have just been shipping away. They've just been shipping. And then, yes, it is a shame that it's not more visible on the behind the scenes. It's a shame that it's more. But we've discussed this before. The B-roll, like when they're shooting, there's like a documentary team there filming, and there's the B-roll. And then they edit that. And that has to be made months in advance for the printing of the discs. And by the time they're doing the visual effects, the Blu-ray is already done a lot of times. And so they are not even going to be part of it. Yeah. These days, it's a bit better because we have YouTube, and there are some companies that put out things.
Yeah.
Especially Netflix does that, and some companies put out it, and we get to see them on festivals. But it's a shame we don't see more of it, because it is fascinating, and I could watch this forever. I don't even... like all these advancements are so, when you think about it, like give an example, Mari, which they've developed at the time already before Avatar, but Avatar was really almost the poster child of Mari.
Poster child for 3D texture painting.
Yes, exactly.
Of using Mari.
Yeah, right? Exactly. And so that's how detailed they went. And that's why now you can get a 4K version of the film, and you can just render it out and have it in 4K on IMAX, because it stands out the test of time, because it is so detailed that almost you have to blur it because it's too detailed. It's like it's too detailed. It's insane.
But also, there wasn't anything off the shelf, really.
At the time,
People
no.
were
At the time,
doing
now
a
we
lot
have
of
subsurface. Like we have, we have a lot
substance and
there's a
but
lot.
most companies were using kind of proprietary tools or very much a Photoshop workflow,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, and UV painting and
Yeah.
Photoshop. Really, that was it. It changed.
Yeah.
And some companies would take advantage of Nuke because Nuke was also resolution, so they could paint some stuff there and then patch it. But Mari is the first time you start having. We're not getting paid by Foundry, but I'm not. This is not an ad for Mari, but what I mean is like Mari is the first time you started having this idea of layering system like Photoshop, but in a three-dimensional sculpt. Yeah. So it's like you're painting, but you're painting with projections and painting with brushes on a real 3D environment. And this really changes everything. It does. Yeah. And I think that's why Avatar looks so good.
And that's why Foundry bought it, took it over, however it worked. Huge development. Another big development that Weta enabled on Avatar was basically a new approach to rendering called spherical harmonics. And Hugo is going to explain exactly what that means in high detail. Now, you will tell me, but what's interesting is Weta has now gone on to make its own renderer called Manuka. Yeah. It's a path tracer. At the time of Avatar, there was a curious little problem that some visual effects studios were having. RenderMan was not a ray tracer.
No.
People were faking ray tracing or photo physically based rendering look and feel with lots of methods. And that included Weta Digital was faking it basically. Yeah. But because of the high sunlight scenes, the bioluminescent scenes, the close-ups on the characters, the world view of Avatar, they needed something in the interim to enable RenderMan to do stuff, but their own rendering to do stuff with spherical harmonics, which Hugo will now explain.
No, I can't. I can't explain that. No. Unfortunately, and I mean, I never worked at Weta, so I don't know the details of how it's achieved. But I know it's quaint these days because when you look at it now, it's literally, if you think about it, very normal now to these days. With Arnold and with V-Ray and with Redshift, we are so used to GI-based and global illumination-based renders and ray traced renders. Especially now, we even have real-time ray tracing as well with Unreal. This is why Avatar looks so photoreal. This is really why. Because of the bounce light. This is really the advancements that they've done in bounce light and also in denoising that light and making the actual light surfaces interact with the materials in a realistic way. So that the transparency was there, that everything would go through the actual different materials. This is completely groundbreaking. And today it's not as much. Like we now have that out of the shelf. Like you install Arnold and it's all there. Yep. You install Redshift, it's all there. Yep. Like it's like I don't even imagine how we're very lucky these days to have that. But without the development of these companies, we would have never really got there. Yeah. I really remember at the time. When this was in 2006, 2007. I started in the industry in '99, and so at the time, we had, like, we probably didn't even have Mental Ray yet, but when, for example, V-Ray showed up, I remember V-Ray became this poster child of photorealism, especially in 2002, 2003, 2004, 2006, and it looked so real because of the way that it bounced lights and because of the way it affected global illumination. But it had another problem. The problem with V-Ray and why it was not used in the industry was, well, two factors. The first one was that it had a lot of problems maintaining noise when it was moving. So it was really good for static frames.
Right.
It was great for that.
Architectural.
That's why they're still using it today, although they fixed most of the denoise issues.
With V-Ray now is clearly an industry renderer that does incredible.
But at the time it had a lot of issues. The second issue, of course, was that at the time it was only Windows based, and the entire industry was Unix or Linux based, and that was always an issue with them. So Weta had to really go deep and actually build something up because they couldn't scale to having thousands of artists working on it had to be on a Linux pipeline. It had to be scalable, and that's but yeah, I don't even. I told you already, and I know you're jealous, but I've seen the clips of Avatar 2 in 3D IMAX, and man, I don't know what they did. I don't know if this is spherical harmonics 2.0 or 3.0.
Oh, it's Manuka. They're incredible path tracing.
It is like I never saw anything like it. I tell everyone here, go and see it on IMAX 3D because I've never seen anything like that. That water and those clips and that skin, I've never seen anything.
Well, let's talk about water for a second, but in relation to Avatar 2009, I had forgotten until I saw it the other day about that incredible sequence where Jake is running away from the monster into the waterfall and bobs up and grabs the tree trunk. I had forgotten how good that looks still today.
Yeah.
And there's a fascinating story behind that. I don't know if you know it, Hugo, which is apparently Weta Digital at the time was really struggling with water. I mean, water's hard.
Like all companies. Yeah. Even today, they still struggle.
Yeah. And
although I don't know what kind of mushrooms they're running there at Weta because they've managed to sort it out.
A mix of Houdini and just their own...
because now with Avatar 2, and even like we've seen it recently with other films, like I think they've nailed it now. Like it looks for the real now.
But back then, I can imagine they were struggling. At the time, there was this artist and a couple of artists working at DNEG, but also in their own company, who had started showing demos of something called Naiad.
Yeah.
Now, Naiad was barely used, but I'm sure someone who worked at Weta saw it and said, you need to come down and show us Naiad for this waterfall sequence. So someone at Weta contacted Marcus, and there's this great story that he relates to me in an article at Befores and Afters. He went down to New Zealand. He plugged in some of the geometry they had for this waterfall sequence, got Naiad working within a couple of days, and boom, he was able to make it work. And honestly, the bubbling and aeration of that water and the foam just worked. And for a while, Weta was just killing these water sequences with Naiad. Yeah. Now, perhaps sadly, but it just is what it is, Naiad was bought by Autodesk and became Bifrost.
Oh, yeah.
And released as Bifrost as a fluid sim. Awesome. But Bifrost is trying to be something more like Houdini, right? In terms of procedural stuff. And I'm not sure where it's up to.
Yeah.
But people often lament the fact that Naiad was this amazing solver for fluid sims and didn't quite reach its potential. But anyway, I thought that had a fun, nice history in Avatar.
I had no idea about that. I had no idea. Yeah. No, the water... Well, I mean, now, whatever they've done, I don't know what they've done, but the water looks even better. So I don't know what they've done there. I look at the water now on Avatar 2, and it looks even... it looks more real than real. I don't know what they've done there. It's just insane. Now, this film, man, I really want everyone to understand, we could stay here for hours and hours talking about this film. And I know there's a lot more stuff that we could talk about it. But I really want people to understand that this film, it came out already 13 years ago, but it was actually made 15 years ago.
Sure.
And that is just shocking if you start thinking about it. 15 years ago, man, Nuke was Nuke 4 and if you start thinking about what existed at the time 15 years ago.
Well, also Weta seemed to make this jump from Shake to Nuke during Avatar perhaps, or just before. That's incredible on its own, isn't it?
But doing a complete... I just really want to emphasize, and let's not also forget that these people were rendering IMAX. They first did the HD, of course, and then they ended up there was an IMAX version in 2013, and this means it was rendered in IMAX resolution as well. I don't know exactly how much resolution they've used. Maybe they potentially, I'm assuming they probably faked it a bit. They probably upscaled it. They probably did 4K or maybe just a little below 4K. But it's 2009. It's my God. It's come on, guys. It's 2009. Yeah. And we struggle with 4K now. we struggle with 4K, and these people were outputting an IMAX level photoreal film. When we are used to seeing all these crowds and we think, oh yeah, they probably did a crowd simulation for something. When you look at Avatar, the crowd simulation is actually captured.
Yeah.
They have like 20 people on the set.
Yeah.
The system went down, it crashed, and then they had to capture it in sections. So they had 15 people at a time, and then 20 people at a time, and then 20 people at a time. And all these people are actually motion captured for real, one by one, and then rendered and done individually at Weta. And I'm like,
amazing.
Yeah.
We should finally point out that at some point they needed to release the film and they needed to finish the film. So very cleverly, they got other visual effects studios involved.
Yes.
Principally ILM, also Framestore, Hybrid, Blur, Hydraulics, Lola, look, a bunch of others. We don't need to mention all of them. Boof did this really cool, the bits where they go into Avatar mode. I always love Boof's things.
The Framestore did this amazing mechs as well going out of the...
Love it.
Yeah,
love
they're
it.
great.
And so we should mention all that other work. The incredible opening shot into the jungle is an ILM forest simulation. Incredible. And what I really like about it is actually, if you watch the film not knowing that other visual effects studios were involved, it really feels like one film. As in, there's nothing that stands out as someone else's work.
Yeah.
Which I think is important.
Absolutely. And if you look at the extended version, because there's like a longer cut, which has like 30 minutes more, they even have like scenes set on Earth, which looks literally like a modern day Blade Runner.
Yeah.
In 2009. I don't know who did those specific shots, but they look beautiful. They look absolutely stunning as well, with Jake going to the bar and then having a fight there. And no, this film is a huge achievement. And I'm sure we're going to say exactly the same when we see Avatar 2. And 3 and 4 and how many whatever avatars we're gonna have in the future.
Well, the clock is ticking. We should wrap it up, Hugo. Awesome to be here in person.
Oh, it's amazing.
We didn't thank everyone at the beginning, but we'll thank you now. Thank you to our Patreon supporters, both on Hugo's Desk and Befores and Afters. Thank you to our sponsors. And thank you to people who like and subscribe to us on YouTube and other podcast providers.
Absolutely.
We love you.
We love you all, and we can't thank enough for all the love we get. Like, we get so many lovely messages on YouTube and on social media of people liking the show, saying that they are watching it and they're listening to it. And keep them coming. I would love to know who's listening, where they're listening. If you're doing something, if you're doing a hike, or if you're in the middle of a forest, just tell us if you're watching it or listening to it.
If you're on Pandora.
No, it's please. Lovely. It's lovely to talk with all of you. And if you have questions as well, just go for it. Just contact us. We are, where you can find us,
Yeah. Awesome. So thanks, Hugo. That was so cool.
It was very cool, Ian. It was great to have you here.
So cool to be in person. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
We're off.
We're off. Off to Pandora. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of VFX Notes. And as you can see, I'm here by myself. Sorry, how are we going to start this? Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the VFX Notes podcast. As you can see, I'm here in London and Sydney, and
sorry, it's okay.
We're gonna do it again. I'm sorry.
We've got to put the bloopers in the end.